Welcome to Scions of the Southland for Sunday, July 7th. I am your host, Akshay, and joining me on this magic carpet ride of Georgia Tech sports are Jake Grant and Jack Purdy. Gentlemen, how are you doing today on this very humid, very rain-looking, soaking Sunday afternoon?
I think between hitting golf balls today at the range and putting and playing 2 hours of pickleball yesterday, I think I have lost about 4 pounds of water weight just from existing outside and being active, which is, I guess par for the course in Atlanta nowadays, now that we have Southern Florida weather systems up here.
I uh I was doing yard work for a good bit of the middle of the day last Saturday. Since we didn't record last week, you got this anecdote today. I lost 6.5 pounds water weight just from yard work. So, gained it all right back.
Woo.
But feeling that today too after I was out on the range too. Out on the range and going for a run. So all another summer day in Atlanta, I suppose.
You'll be all surprised to know that I was not out on the range today. So I'm glad that
Cool.
I can be the difference maker in this group. Let's talk about other difference makers, and talk about a couple of news and notes from around the Georgia Tech ecosystem before we get into the big show today. Chris Eubanks was eliminated from the early rounds of Wimbledon, but he's back in men's doubles. He will be in the Wimbledon round of 16. I think, Jack, when is that game scheduled for?
Probably tomorrow or Tuesday.
Well, keep an eye out for that on tomorrow or Tuesday on some of the lower courts in London. Let's move on to talk about softball a little bit. Hunter Bunch, the Georgia Tech softball hitting coach that Jack wrote a lovely profile on earlier in the spring, is headed to UT Arlington as an assistant coach. Jack, any color on that one that you've heard of?
I haven't talked to them specifically or our communications guys, but if you look at his resume, it's very Texas based. And he just had a kid as well during this season. So if I had to, I mean, only guessing here, but I think it's fair to say like Georgia was not his home. And being home in any way, shape, or form, if you can be, is generally a preferred thing, I think. So it's better. It seems like a better situation for him, just in terms of the out of softball things. He was incredibly successful here, though. There's no way about it. I think if there was no reason, I think there was no reason to want him to not be a coach here at Georgia Tech. Like he changed our hitting in so many good ways, and so the impact is there. It sucks we won't have him for another year, but yeah, solid dude. I wish him all the best.
Speaking of hitting, Drew Burris made the USA Baseball Collegiate National Team for a couple of friendlies. I think one was versus Chinese Taipei. Very good play in the outfield, by the way, in that second game.
Yeah.
And everyone should go find the clip. But he was also named D1 Baseball's Freshman of the Year. So really big honor for him. Speaking of other awards, this one's really a nomination of sorts. Julia Bergman, Georgia Tech alumna Julia Bergman, of course, has made the Brazilian Olympic women's national team in volleyball. She is the volleyball program's first Olympian. So congrats to her. Speaking of other Olympic qualifying, Jose Alvarado and the Puerto Rico national basketball team are in Olympic qualifying. Their final game to determine if they make it to Paris or not is versus Lithuania. That game is today as we record this, so Sunday, in Puerto Rico. So good luck to them. Gentlemen, any more notes before we move on to our big feature of the day?
Between Bergman, Alvarado, and Eubanks, those were three very prominent tech names right now that could all be in the Olympics at the same time, all post tech career as well. So like in terms of impact there, I know I've written about our past Olympians, but that's one of the best trios I think we would have ever put up in a single Olympics if would they all make it. Alvarado's got to get through Domantas Sabonis' Lithuania team, which is not going to be an easy task because Sabonis is the best player between the two teams, that is for sure. So that is in international basketball. It's kind of more team friendly, but if you're gonna pick a guy, you're probably picking Sabonis over Jose. So that'll be. I wish we could watch that game. It doesn't seem like we could have found a way to watch it, but that is a future thing to I guess, tussle
That
it
is
out.
the disappointing thing, and I've heard this complaint around these games. Like Giannis and Luka Doncic played a good Olympic qualifying game a couple
Yeah,
days ago, and the only thing that people heard about it was the result after the game and occasional highlights from FIBA.
right.
Like
Yeah,
no one actually
that's
knew
a
that the
that,
game happened. Like the wider
yeah,
internet would have like
would have been
attached
huge.
onto that game.
Yeah, though the next FIBA World Cup and the next Olympic qualifying, it should be at a bigger stage, especially with the NBA being like the best players being international now. They're much more internationally diverse than they used to be. Um, yeah, there's a lot of room for really healthy, appealing international basketball now, which there's always been, but it's getting bigger and bigger now.
Yeah, on both sides too, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
W isn't necessarily entirely international, but just because of more international players are coming
Right,
through the
right.
college ranks too,
Yep,
you're
yeah.
seeing that spread
Yeah.
of diversity as well. Speaking of diversity, gentlemen, the ACC is now the All Coast Conference. They have coastal diversity. They have added teams from the Gulf Coast and the Pacific Coast. And we
You know, people
congratulate them for
Dallas coast? I don't know, man. That's like as far away from
The
the coast
Oklahoma
as we
Plains
are.
coast.
Yeah, the coasts
I'm
of the
gonna
river.
call it. Let me offer this: the coast of the Red River.
That's not right
That's
either.
that's
That's
like a
like just
seven. It's
as
like a nine
far.
hour drive.
Yeah.
I'm trying. All right, I'm trying. But on July 1st, 2024, Southern Methodist University, the University of California at Berkeley, and Stanford University officially became ACC members. The conference now is in scope 18 teams, 12 states, three time zones, and technically borders two oceans and the Gulf of Mexico if you want to live in my fantasy world. Games between these teams, by the way, start literally next month. So, I
Yep.
mean, I don't know exactly when the first one is. I assume it's probably like August 26th or something, but
Something volleyball-y, yeah. I don't know.
something volleyball will kick off this new era of the ACC. I think, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, that the national media reaction to this compared to the fanfare, guns blazing situation of OU and Texas being added to the SEC has been quite muted. And I think a lot of that is due to Stanford not being good at football and Cal being not good bad at football, and also both of those teams not being great at men's basketball. But that isn't to say that they're bad athletic programs, right? I mean, Jake, you had a whole thing on this that I want to let you get into because I think your take on this was pretty well formed.
Yeah, I think that there's and obviously this is an ACC as pro ACC in general without being annoying rah rah pro ACC as you can get um podcast. I think that really this is an addition of about three I think I'm going to hedge this here a little bit, and I'm going to put this way. SMU is not a bad athletic program. It is a small athletic program. Small in numbers, there are 17 varsity sports, six men, which is, again, incredibly small, 11 women, 17 overall. But on the whole, and stop me if you heard this one before, you're adding, dare I say, I know Texas won the Directors Cup this year, but probably the best athletic program, top to bottom, independent of just flashy eyeballs, football, sports in Stanford. You're adding Cal, which is, I mean, they kind of have to, and I say this as kind of a quiet Cal fan to Akshay's quiet Stanford fan. Rivalry is fun. Cal has to live in that shadow, but they're no slouches either. Between them, Akshay, multiple national titles last year, multiple national runners up. There's a couple third place finishers in there as well. But like we said, Stanford football is not what it was under the early David Shaw years. It's not what it was under Jim Harbaugh. To say nothing about Cal, that's basically been 15 years in the wilderness. And they're complemented by this SMU team that is, even for all of their, and we'll get into this a little bit more in more detail, all of their relatively successful last few years, especially last year. Um, and then going caveat, AAC, all that, small department. It's really about three of I guess athletic wise, good of schools as you could pick up. And I'm going to pull up the rest of the Directors Cup standings because I just had this thought now about what does this look like compared to the schools other conferences are adding. But I mean, Stanford is right at the top. Cal's a top 25 program, and SMU, who are we to judge? They finished above us in the Directors Cup standings. So I'll leave it at that because I'm now way off rambling, and we have actual concrete numbers that we can use to back this statement up. If you guys think that that is a fair way to start to frame this.
Well, but before we get into the numbers, I think the most immediate number that comes to mind here is just baseline student body size,
Yep.
right? Stanford is at, and this is including undergraduates and postgraduates, is at 17.5 thousand.
Mm-hmm.
Cal is at 45.3 thousand, and both of these numbers are Stanford's as of fall 23 and Cal's as of fall 22. SMU's. Does anyone want to take a guess where SMU's is?
Like I
I
should
mean, aren't
know.
they like Wake Forest sized?
I don't have Wake Forest in front of me, but SMU's total student body as of fall 22 was 12,053 students. It is a fraction. Well, I
That is
mean,
smaller than us. That
it's
is smaller than
it's
us.
small. It's close to Stanford, to be fair. It's smaller than Tech,
Yeah.
but I think the point is still there that it is a significantly smaller institution with a significantly lower national profile than Stanford and the University of California at Berkeley. Like,
So,
and there are ostensibly, let's see, the Stanford was founded in 1891. SMU was founded in 1911. Like they are a far, I mean, on the scale, a far younger institution, and also I mean, there's a whole death penalty thing also. So
I was going to say, Akshay, you're completely ignoring the fact that they, as a sports playing entity, basically had to start fresh less than 40 years ago. Which, again, we talk about the death penalty. Seems like it was, a million years ago. This is a school that was essentially kicked to the curb and has had to wander in the wilderness like Moses wandering the Sinai Peninsula for almost 40 years. So I think we can give them that grace at the very least. And I do want to frame this with SMU's coming from the American. This is that long journey back to the top. Cal and Stanford have the complete opposite perspective of this is the lifeline, this is the option we have. And that being said, SMU, I checked the numbers, did finish 54th in the Directors Cup standings. And that's being forced to count baseball as well, a sport that they don't field. But then again, you can count 19 sports and they only have 17. So it doesn't really matter for them. They would have to have every varsity sport scoring athletic points, and they would still have one that they could burn on baseball. But that being said, compared to their peers in the American, and granted, this was after a few have left for the Big 12, and we can kind of unbox that for a sec. I want you guys to take a guess at the place ranking of the next highest American finisher.
What were they?
They were 54th.
they were 54.
54th?
I'm going to say the next team down is, wait, there was one team that was around us, so 73, 74. There was one team around us. Like there
We
was one team
finished
that's like 73.
we finished 74th, and I'm looking at the numbers right now, and you're incorrect. Jack, do you have a guess?
Where was Navy?
Navy was not. Navy, it wasn't Navy. I'm guessing closer to like 95.
Navy, Jack, you're spot on. It's 94. It's Charlotte.
Oh,
Navy counts as a Patriot League school because they are an associate member for football, and they finished 102nd. So you're wrong twice, and you should feel bad. Oh, and I'm wrong. It was Memphis at 92, and I read right over them. So don't get too happy there. Just kind of running down the list because I do think that this is important because it's going to frame the next thing that I say. If you look at these Big 12 teams that left the American, actually the highest new Big 12 team, if you will, is BYU. They finished it at 36th overall. They finished 4 places against a ostensible peer, Houston, who finished 58th overall, just for those that are counting at home. All that said, this is a team that has been dominating this conference in the same way that Stanford has been essentially dominating all sports except football, men's basketball, and I guess field hockey. Like this is the of the newcomers, if you will. SMU has positioned themselves, I would say, very well, and they have the many postseason finishes and many postseason appearances to show for it. And I think that is, that this is a national ranking. It's not a perfect ranking or anything like that, but they're, getting these bids, and this is with their basketball team falling on the bad side of the bubble and not making that tournament as well. So I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to talk myself into it now that they're actually in the conference, but at a high level, getting the number 2 program in the country in the form of Stanford, getting the number 20 program in the country in the form of Cal, and getting number 54 SMU, one of the better football playing institutions that's out there on a comprehensive basis. I think they look pretty good to me.
Well, let's be clear. The reason that SMU is also in this mix is because they are a veritable money cannon.
Yes.
You have to remember that SMU's decision, its offer, from what was reported, to not take an ACC rev share,
Yep.
Is effectively subsidized. I mean, it's subsidizing I mean, it's helping subsidize its entire venture, right?
Yeah, it's almost an entry
Stanford,
fee of sorts.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the financials a little bit later because I think that's a whole other fascinating conversation. But SMU, in keeping with their like philosophy about this move, that this is their shot back at the big time of Division I college athletics, is spending money. They are spending money willy-nilly. They're investing in their facilities. It is a very rich part of Dallas, and they are acting like it.
Dare we say they got promoted, like they are acting like this is pro rel, like they in a way got promoted, like they did get promoted. They promoted themselves. They put themselves in the position to do that. Themselves. But they in a system that could probably a lot of people think pro rel would be advantageous. They're kind of doing it. They're kind of doing it.
Akshay, I saw that reaction. Just kind of rounding out this point because it is worth making. There are Ivy League teams, Denver out of the Summit and Georgetown out of the Big East, among mid-major non-power league schools that finished in front of SMU overall. And there's not one after them in the rankings until you bump into Northern Arizona at number 70, thanks to their insane cross-country programs. So all that said, talking about these kind of on a more specific level, just kind of introducing everyone to the I guess the breakdown here. We kind of hinted at this. Stanford, very large program. They sponsored 36 varsity sports. That's 15 on the men's side, 19 on the women's side, and 2 combined teams, fencing and sailing. So co-ed fencing is an NCAA sport. Sailing is not. They had lightweight rowing on their website listed as a varsity sport, so I counted that. Don't really know how that's different than rowing. I guess now I have to learn because they're in the conference, or maybe I don't. A couple of those other sports that are non-NCAA include squash, artistic swimming, men's rowing is in the mix there as well. I'm not sure that is a varsity sport. On the Cal side, they sponsored 30 sports, 16 women, 14 men, notable non-NCAA sports for them. You got men's rowing in the mix. You got men's rugby in the mix, of which they have 27 all-time titles in that. So that's kind of neat. And then a few other non-NCAA titles scattered around for, older championships and things like that. And then SMU, 6 men's, 11 women's, 17 overall. Very different, I would say. They have 4 NCAA titles, including 3 in a sport they no longer sponsor, men's track and field, between indoor and outdoor teams there. While Stanford has, and I know you guys have seen the sheets, so let this breathe for a second. 136 NCAA titles across all sports. 136. That's 65 on the men's side, or women's. Oh, go for it.
I haven't done the math on this yet, but I'll be curious if that retroactively makes the ACC the most winningest conference in NCAA history just by the
Okay.
fact that we have Stanford.
I
I
would
I don't know
I
if it
maybe.
think
actually does.
UCLA going the other way is going to be a lot
Good
of
point. Good point. Because
yeah.
they went both ways. I do know when I did some of my Olympic articles that it did retroactively completely change which conferences had the most Olympic medals. Like we jumped up to second, I think, uh,
Yeah.
to
Speaking of
Michigan.
that, by the way, Stanford 302 Olympic medals, including 153 gold. Cal, I just had this 223 Olympic medals, including 121 gold, and I don't have SMU's in front of me. But yeah, you're talking about two athletic athletic programs of staggering prowess
And
in
I,
sports that are not the media machine take
and
generators.
I didn't even say Cal's titles. They got 34 NCAA men's titles. They got 9 women's titles for a total of 43, in addition to those 27 men's rugby titles, a bunch of other rowing and, non-recognized titles. Like and shoot, Stanford's got 50 that the NCAA doesn't recognize. Of course, a lot of those are indoor tennis, so I guess that's kind of doubling up there. But, we hang him on our banner for the women's team, so I figured I'd count him in this sheet.
Yeah. So again, that narrative that the ACC is cooked because they've been forced to add your Cals, your Stanfords, your SMU, I guess, is less of this is honestly rotten with just logical fallacy.
Yep.
But we don't have to get too deep into that. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about what the new era of the ACC looks like in terms of scheduling. It's fascinating how they've tried to fit these teams in. Obviously, you have two teams that are on the literal opposite coast and one in Dallas, which is in the middle of everything. So you have a couple of different options to try to make that cross country travel more bearable. And to be fair, that having done that cross country flight multiple times, it is not fun when you have
Yeah.
to do it often. Um, so a couple of notes here. Volleyball, Georgia, and these are Georgia Tech specific to be clear. Volleyball is playing at Stanford and Cal back to back. I don't remember if it was in back to back days or back to back
It
weekends. I
is
assume it was in
it
back to back
is
days.
yeah, that is going to be the same weekend. And I believe that's going to be the
Mm-hmm.
case for basically every team that that the ACC could finagle that for.
Yeah.
Stanford is also coming here. I the Cal I don't believe is and Stanford is not coming on a back to back against like Cal is not coming with Stanford here to play us. And for as far as I can tell, there was no potting that happened. Like it's not going to be Tech and or like when Stanford comes to Tech, it's not going to be Stanford here and then Clemson drives down and plays in O'Keefe as well, or Florida State drives
Which
down.
you would think would be smart, but I think what these teams want to do is maintain their building home field advantage, even if
Mhm.
there is a travel element for one
Yep.
of the teams required. And I think we'll get into the rest of these in a minute, but like that travel aspect is actually a pretty serious effect here. I think Stanford, when they played at UNC, or not UNC, wow, Northwestern, they played football at Northwestern a couple of years ago. There was a massive amount of complaining from the Stanford side about the body clock effect. They did
Yeah.
end up losing that
Well,
game to
didn't you hear that
Northwestern.
about Cal UNC too? Like that was a
I don't
9
remember.
a.m.
I
Pacific kick, I believe.
might have been well. It also happened to Cal Auburn too.
Yep.
That was last year
Yeah.
too. Like you see this effect where even because the travel is short notice, right? Like you're not spending the entire for football, you're probably not spending the entire week in
No.
under that time zone. For and especially on some of these other in some of these other sports, you're flying not private, you're flying commercial. You're staying in hotels. You still have to do the schoolwork. Like it's and these flights are 6 hour cross country flights, other than the Dallas, which is only 2.5 or something,
Yeah.
I guess.
Okay. I want to raise a point here, and this is just me spitballing. I don't know Cal and Stanford's actual schedule inside and out and how they schedule, charter versus commercial. But knowing what I know, knowing the athletes I know, I have to imagine that just getting on a charter plane and going across the country and landing and sometimes you probably can't get a cross country charter into Blacksburg, so that there's probably a little bit of driving involved there. But like, shoot, this past season, Louisville had to connect going from Boston College back home to Louisville like a week and a half before finals through Atlanta late on a Sunday. I can't I can't really fathom that, if you're a football, men's basketball, women's basketball, at least, presumably on a charter to most of these places, especially for football, but on a charter almost everywhere, just sitting down and going doesn't seem all that different, subtracting the body clock part from what they do right now. And I haven't really heard that take at all. I'm unboxing that for the first time here. Let's not pretend
just to make sure I have your
is great either,
just to make sure I have your point straight. Are you saying that there's not necessarily a physical difference between flying charter and flying commercial?
No, I'm saying there's a huge difference.
Oh, okay. Wow, how did I get the opposite?
I'm saying there's a huge difference.
Opposite.
The charter goes when you show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you don't have to connect through Atlanta.
Yeah, it's like if you fly charter, you can, like, what your team ops person can sort of move at their own pace, right? Like you said,
it's scheduled to leave when you want to leave. That's the point of the charter.
Yeah. It's a big difference.
And that makes travel a lot easier. I
like the body clock is real. Like, and going to the East Coast for a Tuesday night basketball game, like that's wacky. But
yeah,
I don't know. Like,
we'll see how that lands. Yeah, I'll be curious if we haven't got the basketball, but I'll be curious if they figure that out to make those weekend games as much as possible. I did just check Cal and Stanford's volleyball schedules. Their conference schedules are out. Texas not. Don't know why, but it's not, and I know they're trying to get it out. They come to an east. Both teams make 4 trips to the Eastern time zone.
Sounds about right
during the season.
A Tech Clemson swing for Stanford, I'm sure.
Yep, that is the case. Both. Yep, they do that. Weirdly enough, Clemson and Tech both go to Cal on back-to-back days.
Yep, that makes sense
too. They do not. Cal does not play at Clemson. Actually, Cal doesn't even come to Tech either. So that is how we're playing them.
Travel.
So kind of similar situation there. There are two more ACC games this year in volleyball because of the expansion. So we're gonna have 20 conference games this year instead of 18. And that does, and they look to keep like that kind of same format where like the top tier teams play each other twice, and then they go down a tier, and those teams play each other twice. You go down a tier, those teams play each other twice. So we got Stanford twice. I don't think we got Louisville twice. We just only play at Louisville if I can remember.
No! But they're sending us to the House of Pain, though. The
we're going
Federal Credit Union House.
We got to go there, which is the sucky part about it. But
and also we added Stanford, which is not really.
No, it really isn't. It really is the worst case scenario.
You have to go
yeah, it's not great. So yeah, we're gonna have more conference games. So
those conference games are fitting into that or the usual conference tournament week, right? When everyone else is playing their conference tournament, or does it
mid-majors? Yeah, but also quick note: the conference did have 20 games prior to the 2018 fall season. They did cut it back by 2 games, and so when they originally got rid of the conference tournament, I believe they went all the way out to 22, because then that would have been a double round robin with the conference at the time, playing 11 teams home and away. And that got cut back by 2 at some point, and then cut back by another 2, 2018-19, I believe. And this is me shooting from the hip with no checking on my notes on this. I think it was in order to try and get more dates on the schedule for like marquee, raise the profile of the conference type non-con stuff, because we have really ticked up that.
Helpful.
So no complaints there, but just worth noting that this is a very different format than 20 games, but we have seen Tech get a 20 game slate as recently as fall 2019. And I don't know if they were tiering the games the same way back then. I just know that we got Clemson every year back then twice. And I think Syracuse was on that schedule too, but this is, again, really shooting from the hip here. So
Yeah, and it does. I was digging further into Stanford's schedule. It looks like they're basically just sending pairs of schools out to California. Like, so
Mhm.
Virginia and Virginia Tech go back to back against Cal and Stanford, and they just switch spots. Us and Clemson switch spots against those two teams when we fly out there.
Yep.
Stanford does the Duke North Carolina swing. They don't play
So
like, yeah. Go ahead.
question. Do you think they could charter that? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
Or it's just mathematically easy because you're scheduling people as pairs.
yeah.
That
I don't
would
know.
make sense too.
I will wonder if like when us and Clemson go out there, if we just fly on the same plane. I don't think charter planes get that. The charter plane, you need a pretty big charter plane, I guess, to actually make that happen. So probably not feasible. But
We'll see.
putting them on the same plate, I'm sure Clemson's got the bank to not have to worry about our travel arrangements. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So probably not. But just thinking off the dome there, it's curious. Stanford only goes to SMU. SMU doesn't go to Stanford. Which is you'd think would be the logical thing to make them pair up twice. But as I mentioned, they're doing the how good are you pairings to play home and away versus the what geographically makes the most sense.
Yep.
It's such a
it'll be
weird,
interesting
wacky
to
world.
watch this play out too. I think the thing that surprised me the most, like I knew this was the case. It makes sense. DBU being big in Dallas is
Mhm.
probably at least a little bit attributable to not every D1 school in the area having a baseball team, and I guess baseball and softball are going to be different as well as we get into that there too. But
Yeah.
not the same bridge point, I guess, to say like, hey, Stanford and hey, Cal, you'll at least go to Central Time here. As much as one can kind of thread that needle,
Yeah.
but
I did want to mention this. Like I know we had a travel implications section separate, but we kind of already went over the entire part. But like, if this the volleyball will be the first real test case of like how is this going to work. This is for us and the new Big Ten and the new Big 12 as well. Of like, okay, what do those Arizona to West Virginia games look like? What do those Rutgers versus UCLA volleyball games look like? Like it's gonna be crazy. I think UCLA is coming to Atlanta. The team hasn't confirmed me, but I'm highly speculating that. Um, we're gonna see a lot of early examples of this in the first few months, and so I'll be really interested to see like how do the athletes respond to this. Are they going to does it just destroy them immediately? Does this affect grades? Does this affect performance? Like, just the win-loss record is going to be really interesting to see. Like, do these California teams have an even bigger home court advantage by having to play a bunch of East Coast teams? Do the East Coast teams have a massive home court advantage by playing the West Coast teams at home? Like, how that shakes out is going to be interesting from a win-loss record, but from a, as you mentioned with the body clock, like how are you doing as a human? Like, does this psychologically affect you? Like, there's so many layers to this that is we kind of know off. Like, past athletes have said, like, this is gonna suck because they have done college athletics and know the travel sucks, but like we're gonna get a heavy volume of this very quickly.
yep.
It's also like this makes very clear, not that this wasn't clear already, but no one like consulted the athletes in making these changes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
no, not at all, not
obviously,
at all.
but like all of like to all of the questions that you ask, like, is this going to impact academics? Of course,
Yeah,
because they're taking red eye commercial flights in
it better.
between
Yeah.
the city of their home city and some city on the west coast, the east coast, or
Mhm.
whatever. Right? Is this going to impact sleep schedules? Yes. Is this going to impact athletic performance? Most likely, like
Yeah,
leagues that have consistent cross country travel tend to have higher home field advantages. Like that,
right. Yeah,
when you're sleeping in your own bed and not having to get on a plane, like typically the home field advantage is
Well,
higher.
and
yeah.
and
So,
and you think about that too, kind of tying back to a point I don't think that we hammered on quite as much as maybe I wanted to. Um, when you think about the sports that Stanford and Cal in particular are really good at, men's gymnastics, women's golf, women's rowing, women's water polo, men's water polo, women's gymnastics, men's swimming and diving. I just listed every sport except women's soccer and softball that one of those two schools finished in the top three from last year. There's a lot that they're really good at, but on those levels, those sports that they dominate, that's really not a shift to the status quo. Like, I'm sure Stanford will continue to host the Godwin and the golf team will continue to do their merry thing and the water polo teams will go play UCLA and USC and whomever else in women's and men's water polo is out there. And my concern then, given the narrative that's around this, is, oh gosh, between these three teams, none of them were good at men's basketball last year, except SMU, which was a fringy bubble team and a weird American. Between Stanford and Cal was a bubble baseball team that got left out, and Stanford was a giant letdown. Cal was a bowl team. SMU was an AAC title game participant. But again, that's playing
Raise the banner.
So probably a little bit different in those three marquee sports. And you can throw Cal and SMU's women's basketball in there too. Stanford kind of sits alone there. You can throw Cal women's volleyball in there. All these sports, the ones that are driving that that narrative, are all the ones that are most affected by this change, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially you can say, hey, Stanford's got this incredible baseball pedigree, because they do. They really do. But is that going to still exist in this new paradigm? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it going to make it harder for Troy
Taylor
thing? I honestly don't know. I'm interested to find out, but the ACC's been battling this weird men's basketball underrated period, whatever. Words are hard, for an extended amount of time, and throwing in fringy bubble team and bad and worse into the mix is not going to do that any favors, to say nothing about, hey, maybe SMU helps football, but I don't know. It seems very tricky, and the fact that these schools are so good, but in these sports that are just kind of going to continue to do what they've always done, is the weird part for me.
And going to football, that's the sport that's going to get affected probably the least, because they have the fewest number of games, the least amount of travel, and very reliable. It is on a weekend. They're going to get catered to much more. There is more resources thrown to them to make their lives easier. They're going to stay in a better
every
hotel.
Every single training facility is a spaceship, right?
It's the imbalance. Again, I'll be curious if there's some more things to throw on, what will happen here. I'll be curious if there's stories of just feelings of imbalance of how those teams are treated, or maybe not treated, but just how they come out of this season. This first initial season of okay, how does did football notice any noticeable differences by playing an ACC schedule versus playing a Pac-12 schedule versus the rest of those teams? I don't know for sure, of course, but the fact they play fewer games.
The sample size on football is going to be tiny, right? We're not really going to know, we're not going to have enough of a sample size for at least until the end of this first 12-team playoff contract.
Agreed.
Until 2030 for football specifically. For baseball, I think we'll be able to tell within 2 years. For volleyball, probably within 2 or 3 years as well. You got to hit something like 30 games to make this a worthwhile comparison. But I don't know, it's such a weird situation when you're talking about that imbalance, right? That some of these smaller sports are really going to get hammered and the costs have gone up. None of this is cheaper. Right. Just because they've moved conferences, and we'll get into the revenue stuff, and we keep teasing it, but we'll get into the media revenue stuff in a bit. But stuff has gotten more expensive, and they're making less money, not even equivalent money. It's patently ridiculous. We're coming back to I think to a point we're coming back to the absurdity of having two West Coast schools and a school in Dallas and an ostensibly Atlantic Coast conference.
Right. I'm looking at the Cal's football schedule. All of their road games are against teams that are either in the East Coast or within very close driving distance to the East Coast, and that's Auburn.
I was going to say, they scheduled that Auburn game
well in advance.
Before Cal to the ACC was a glimmer in anyone's eyes.
Right.
But
it was so long ago.
Drive down there just for the heck of it. We'll see.
It's interesting. And then Stanford, they go to Notre Dame, so that's not exactly coast, but a little bit closer. But their road trips, they go to San Jose State. I mean, not much of a trip, but then everything else is East Coast for them.
They'll sleep in their own bed after playing San Jose State.
Yes, they will. That's a 1 p.m. local kick. Yeah,
I was going to say, if they don't, I'd be real concerned.
Yeah. But otherwise,
Hey, to be fair, when Tech plays even here, they don't sleep. They don't sleep in their own beds. They go to a hotel. So technically,
and they got TV'd their Syracuse games on a Friday. It's on a Friday night.
Oof.
That's disgusting.
Yeah.
In the JMA wireless go.
Yeah.
Sounds so weird to say that, by the way.
Rip.
We should bleep that
just
out.
doubling back to more of the schedule stuff. Despite our notes here saying quick run through scheduling effects, not super long. I think we've spent 30 minutes on just this, but going through more of the scheduling effects for Tech other than just volleyball. Football, I think we've talked about just how the travel implications look for that, but Tech won't play either Stanford, Cal, or SMU until 26, so we're kind of just got to see how that one works. Men's basketball, the schedule has been adjusted. It's important to note, like, all of the major revenue sports, which now also kind of include, they include volleyball, obviously, and now also include women's basketball, given the growing popularity of both of those.
Mm-hmm.
Those have all had their new schedule formats released. Obviously, volleyball is about to start playing games, so that would probably be important. But men's basketball, women's basketball, I think, Jag, you can talk a little bit about the actual fixtures for both Cal and Stanford and SMU, I guess. But the thing that I think is still notable to me, and I'm pretty sure this hasn't changed, but I have to go back and check, it's still the same conference tourney size.
Right? Yeah, they didn't change it. Yeah.
And we won't, and I imagine, we won't know until the spring, but all of the other ACC sports that have a conference tourney, who knows if they're going to change, right?
Right. I'd be baseball's the one that's really curious to be.
Please,
we still have
to change it.
You have to change it.
I beg you, please change that.
No. Hold on. I am okay with keeping the pool play format if they do a normal group stage tournament without the stupid freaking tiebreaker of highest seed advances.
Yeah,
do 14 groups. I think there are 16 teams, right? There's 16 baseball teams.
And
No, SMU doesn't have one. It should be 15.
Yeah. Sure. I don't know.
I don't know. This is me pointing at Jake to tell me what the right answer is.
SMU doesn't have one, neither does Syracuse. But Notre Dame, again, remember those guys? They're in the mix there.
Unfortunately. So 16
minus 2, so 16 teams. Yeah,
it works.
16, 14 groups, 4-team groups.
It would be great.
Team round top. I'm telling you, it's perfect.
It would.
That's what they should do.
I am sure. I am sure that idea has been floated in the ACC offices, but I have no clue if that's actually the case. But it's only 15 teams for the basketball tournaments, so you can miss it. Scheduling wise, we got 2 home and away teams for men's basketball. We got Clemson, Notre Dame, and Boston College as our permanent home and aways, and then you play everyone else at home, and then you play one set of 7 at home and one set of 7 on the road, and then those flip the next year. So we don't play the new, and you play the new, and you do one California trip in every 2 years, and our trip is not until 2025, 2026. So we won't have that yet.
I have a take. Clemson should always be a home and home. Shoot, I think the UGA series should be a home and home in basketball. I think that would rule. I think it should be a home and home in volleyball. I love what baseball did, except for the truest thing, and we don't have to get into that right now. Notre Dame being a home and home on our schedule is almost perfect. That matchup has had no national jazz basically for the entire time that I've been involved with Georgia Tech. But every single one of those basketball games has been an absolute heater. So the fact that remains a home and home, I am ecstatic for that. That's a team that I think they kind of maybe not forced the pairing given some historical football rivalry connection type deal there. Rudy was offsides. The fact that stays like that, I think is really good. That's a team that's trying to figure itself out, kind of like Georgia Tech is trying to figure itself out. I don't trust Brad Burnell to be good in
no one.
Years.
Let's be clear. No one should
do that. No one should ever do that, in fact. And then Boston College, I mean, that's
fine. Fine.
That's been a cellar dweller team with us for most of the
If
most
that
of the
buys
last
us
10
more
years.
wins, great. I don't
Like,
no
There are
guarantee, but
three,
I think
like
that
it's a
worked out
pot of
as good as
four.
possible for us, by the way. That's what I'm trying to
gotcha,
circle back.
gotcha.
No, to your point, it's like four teams that are of like general equal mediocrity, other than the fact that Clemson made a tournament run last year. But like general, like randomized mediocrity in that foursome, right? Like you could order all four teams in like any combination, and I'd believe you.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's interesting that they've kept it the same, right? That the conference tournament size the same. And Jake, you said good for both of them. And to
I,
an extent, I understand why, right? Like it turns the regular season into this crucible.
you cut me off halfway through my point, and I think you're about to go way left turn, so I'm going to reel you back in because I think this is a really important point. In an 18 team league, if you're playing a double or triple, ladder bracket as the ACC has done, that forces your eighth or ninth best team to go and play a very, very, very bad team. In an 18 team league, whoever's in last, unless it's unless everything just goes and becomes a coastal, that 18th team is going to be terrible. Where that 9 seed, they could be fighting for a bubble bid. You do not want them to potentially take a loss to the worst team in the conference. Making it the 15 seed, yeah, not perfect, whatever. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think from gaming the RPI, you got to do it. And darn straight, I love Georgia Tech basketball, men's and women's. I do not want to go watch 18 seed Georgia Tech get pasted
No.
on a Tuesday. I just don't.
I
Okay.
mean our conference games were hard enough as it was this year. Like like those initial games in both tournaments are
I,
those can be chores to
I mean,
watch.
even
this
like,
this
yeah, I
is
mean,
this is
like
this
bad
is just
basketball is
cut
bad.
the worst fat off of the first day of the TV product. Yes, I know the argument should be in a perfect world, it's like like a US Open or FA Cup. Everyone the tournament doesn't start in the first round or in Dayton. The tournament starts on a Tuesday in Asheville when the
Sure,
Big
sure.
South
I get
kicks
you.
off or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. You know what? That was my opinion for a long time. For mid majors, for low majors, I think that's awesome. I think they should continue to do that. For the ACC, it's your worst television product. Nobody's going to be watching the 18 seed play the 9 seed
No one's gonna
at
go to the game
11
either.
a.m.
Yeah.
on a Tuesday in where the
Greensboro.
hell
Yeah.
place you justify it because now we're everywhere, I guess. The Chase Center at
Right.
11 a.m. Pacific time or whatever.
God, that is so cursed. Oh my God, why would you even put that into the ether? I'm
Deal with it,
so
Jim. Um,
oh.
It's
the the
I get your point. It's yeah, it's
and
not good. It is not good television. It does not raise the value of it is not a valuable game in any way, shape, or
and
form.
and it's most important for that RPI lens. I think
Yeah.
that's what I've just come around to on in the last couple of days because I've always been the every team should make it starts in Tuesday and whatever that kind of thing. But from a purely RPI perspective, you're just shooting that ninth team in the foot because either they beat a team they're supposed to beat that's bad, or they lose to a team that's bad, and that is a no-win
That's
situation.
not good. I'll also
And
note the women's tournament, the women's side, we only get one home and home, unlike the
Yeah,
men, and that's just that's Clemson, obviously.
as it should be.
Yeah.
Jake, to your point, and this actually ties back to what I was saying about the baseball and softball tournaments. It's like the way that those are structured, and especially the tiebreaker for the baseball tournament is to protect those top seeds in
Yep.
the exact same way that you're describing, right?
Yep.
Like the ACC builds these formats for better or for worse to protect the top teams in its league from dropping into the bubble, or I mean, it tries to guarantee them NCAA tournament access in some way, right?
And that's not even the part that's important. It's protecting the bubble teams. Somebody's going to get the auto bid, and if you're in the
Hmm.
ACC, you're going to be good. It's protecting those bubble teams that really,
Right,
really counts for that post exposure.
Yeah. Yeah.
right. But it's saying like, okay, well, like we don't want. I mean, yes, a bracket is random, right? Despite the win rates of better teams in basketball, like it remains that like if you like on any given Sunday, et cetera, like weird stuff happens on a in a sporting event, a single game sporting event, right? So I think you're right, and I think it leads to a more interesting regular season slate. right? Because now you have 18 teams battling for the same 15 slots. There's more danger of elimination. There's more danger of elimination, and the talent level with the addition of Stanford, especially at the very top, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stanford is basically on its own line, right?
So yeah, someone,
In terms of conference.
yeah, someone in the ACC lost their tournament spot because conference in the women's side because Stanford
Yeah,
exists now.
yeah, it's Stanford, and then the chunk of
No,
four teams that we usually talk about, and then everyone else,
no,
right? Like,
no,
Someone did
really?
lose their spot in the
no,
tournament.
no. I think you're essentially spreading the shots to play that good RPI, that good net team around to more people. I think it's worse for your, mid-major Oregon State, Washington State that's not getting shots at Stanford. Kind of like the thought of volleyball playing all those good teams in one bubble. What that
Hmm.
does is it helps those good teams at the top because they're all playing each other more. Hurts somewhat those teams in the middle who aren't getting that shot. And then, the teams at the bottom, they probably weren't going to make it anyways. This is that, but on the conference scale, if that makes sense.
That makes it okay.
You have
Okay,
the
that makes
opportunity
sense.
to go into Stanford, who's going to handle their business non-con in women's basketball, volleyball, and softball.
Hmm.
Now, you go out to Stanford, you go win 2 out of 3 or win 1 out of 3 even. Like I'd rather Tech do that than going to play, I don't know, Syracuse for 3 games or
I know. Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
you know what I
I get.
mean?
Yeah, I think I bet the in the ACC tournament,
Ah,
someone's going to lose their spot. That for sure. That was
in
yeah,
the
Yeah, and
ACC
I was
yeah,
tournament,
saying
in
for
maybe.
the
I don't I
perspective.
don't think it would knock them out of the NCAA.
national NCAA. Yes, I get your point. Yeah, the RPI does
Yeah.
change on the national level. ACC, where it's just raw record. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to be a little different.
Like, okay, terrible Wake Forest women's basketball team last year. Bye.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Yeah,
not to be callous about it, terrible Louisville men's basketball team, equal opportunity,
yeah. No,
to defend here.
this does improve the quality of our conference tournament now too. In theory, it should. I would hope it should. Now you got more shots to have more better teams in there.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, the baseball, softball, tennis, we don't know what this is going to look like yet.
And
Here's what I do know though is that for all those conference championships that got announced to 2030, that all those are going to be in North Carolina, which means that all these all the California teams and SMU they're going to have to come to North Carolina to do all these conference championships, which are multi-day affairs and things like that for a lot of them. So they're at a massive disadvantage just trying to win the conference in a tournament setting as well.
well, we'll see how those fans travel. I mean,
That's true.
even a lot of ACC schools that aren't on Tobacco Road don't travel particularly well. Us, Miami, FSU,
Yeah.
Boston College, Notre Dame, like that. It's tough, and it's asking a lot for somebody to fly from Palo Alto for that. But I do want to kind of just you know pivot just for a second because there's one point that I just pulled and finished pulling this sheet together that we've got here
Yep.
together a little bit more into a summary sheet. Um, and I have one red flag that I do want to put up just because I think we can expand on this a little bit more. SMU, they're the team that's coming up. We talk a lot about Stanford. We talk a lot about Cal. We just kind of said like SMU's been good. Dot dot dot. I went and derived their non-conference records for their programs that have um, match play, that kind of stuff. Overall, total men's, women's win loss tie win percentage is a 647. That
Good.
is that
Good.
is above Cal's overall and below Stanford's. Stanford's a 661, Cal's a 613 for those counting at home. In conference, Stanford and Cal, Stanford 619, Cal an even 500, 94 94, very, very balanced as you would like. Those two schools are both about 690, low 690s in non-con record. SMU, however, 739 in conference, 580 non-con. That is the school that you're going to have to watch out for with the bumps. And I think that's going to certainly be something that gets played out in terms of men's and women's basketball. Obviously soccer is quite good in the ACC, tennis as well. If anything, I know we've talked about them coming in confident and, dominating that American play. That might be a rough transition. And I think, Houston, Cincinnati and UCF might have some guidance there to get into from their Big 12 transition the year before.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we should take a short break. We'll be back to talk about all of the stuff involving TV revenue and media revenue in a bit. Back in a tick.
Yeah, as always, this podcast is brought to you by Section 103. Section 103 is the best place to find Georgia Tech apparel. I'm in a Ramblin' Wreck shirt today, my Ramblin' Wreck script shirt. I haven't worn it in a while, let alone for the podcast. And as ever, you can find that on section103.com. It is, of course, the best place to find things in Georgia Tech in general, but also in gold, I say, as I'm sitting in a white shirt. But I am, in fact, looking at a picture of Bobby Dodd Stadium and wondering about how I will plan out my gold outfits because got to look unified, as tough as that is sometimes for Georgia Tech. But the best place to stock up and look good and look Georgia Tech is at Section 103, everything in old gold, white, and of course, some navy as well. Shipping will resume on Wednesday, July 10th. So if you order between now and then, it'll ship on or around Wednesday. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, as always, free shipping over $70. Use code FTRS for 10% off. Tell them we sent you. We appreciate it, and so do they. Back to the show.
Before we start, I just saw one thing. Julia Bergman's brother is also going to the Olympics. So we're going to get double Bergman action out there. He did not go to Tech, so it doesn't count for us. But
in volleyball?
Yes, in volleyball.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to say it'd be kind of off the wall if it wasn't.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It's actually in fencing, I've been told. I don't know. I picked the most at least a volleyball oriented sport to try to make a reference. But
I feel like that's got to help in fencing, right? You know. Ooh.
I'm not even gonna. I don't know. Fencing is only like technically an ACC sport. I think it is way outside my periphery. But what is within my periphery and within my core is talking about TV revenue, and especially the ACC's new TV revenue sharing model. This is coming from Stuart Mandel at The Athletic. Stanford and Cal are joining the ACC with an agreement that entitles them to 30% of Tier 1 media revenue through their first 7 years of conference membership. So when we talk about Tier 1 media revenue, if I remember correctly, you're talking about your revenue sports. So mainly, probably dropping baseball, it's mainly your football and men's basketball TV revenues. So anytime you see a ACC network broadcast or a ACC on ESPN broadcast or what have you, that is your Tier 1. Those are your Tier 1 media revenue earners, generators. And that Stanford and Cal get 30% through the first 7 years. In year 8, that's 70%. In year 9, it's 75%. In 10, Stanford and Cal will get full 100% revenue shares. SMU, like we mentioned before, is taking absolutely zero media revenue share for 9 years. And then in year 10, they'll get their 100% share. Obviously, all of this assumes that the ACC and its deal with ESPN and its other broadcast partners remain steady. Obviously, there's ongoing litigation from, oh my God, like Clemson, UNC, and FSU against the ACC that could drastically change the terms of this deal. But that's still litigation and not actual legislation or actual actionable litigation outcomes. So we'll set that aside for now. Again, like SMU is taking no money because they see this as their invite back to the big time after the death penalty.
Yep.
And they're basically having their alumni pump a bunch of money into their program in celebration of this. So it's a very interesting philosophical situation there. A couple other notes. The withheld money every year is approximately $50 to $60 million. So that is sort of the other portion of Stanford and Cal and all of SMU's rev share. Some of that will come back to the other conference members. So it's weird to say, but the original ACC members. So everyone Louisville and before. And then some of that will be distributed based on conference finish and winning and all of the other stuff. Like a bunch of the other schools in the conference they wanted to be rewarded for winning and performance rather than getting an equal rev share. The Tech upshot of this is that we are probably Tech as an institution is probably going to get a larger slice of media revenue, right? The last number that I remember on this was about $25 million And I think around 30% of the budget is funded by ACC TV revenues, um, and just media revenue in general. So look for that to expand a little bit, for the, ongoing litigation schools of the world. This is probably not enough money to placate them.
Yeah.
So
It
we'll
gives
see
it
how it.
it gives us something, but if in the case of those three delinquents, it does not put them in the Michigan, Ohio State, Bama, Auburn, that tier of school that they're trying to match that revenue level that the
And to
SEC
be
and Big Ten
clear,
bandwidth fetch.
for comparison, if I remember correctly, the SEC TV deal tops out at $90 million per school per year. So,
Yeah.
and I think the Big Tens, because that was negotiated after, is just about equivalent. So keep that in mind. Like, there's still a definite tiering of your athletic conferences, right?
Yeah.
The big and the SEC are still at the top. I don't remember exactly what the per team per school or per team per year number is for the Big 12, but they're probably number 3 or number 4, and then the ACC is number 3 or number 4. Obviously, the Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore. So, like, there's still a tiering, there's still a stratification, and for the schools that think they're outkicking their coverage in their current conference and saber rattling for more, even the amount that they're getting distributed from Stanford and Cal not taking the cash is just not it. It's not going to be enough. I haven't done the math for it, but like, given what they're arguing, it's not going to be enough.
Hooray!
It's great. We're doing such a good job, at negotiating all of the controversy
I just
baked
saw
into the ACC.
I just saw a thing here. The last year's revenue sharing was about 60 million for each of the Big Ten schools per tax filing. So not 90, but it will get to 90 eventually.
Tops out.
Yeah,
Tops
like
out
it's
at 90.
yeah, we're not living in the $90 million reality yet, but we're getting there. I mean, the ACC's media TV revenue went up last year to a pretty solid amount as well. So like everyone is increasing. The delta rate of increase is not equivalent either for these conferences as well. So the problem, another big problem here is that, just at least if you're anyone in the ACC, is that the other schools are getting more money and they're getting more money faster than we're getting more money. So that they have an even bigger gap between there's a gap between just sheerly how much money there are and how quickly they're getting more money on top of that. So that in a way, SMU helps with. I mean, these three schools coming helps close that a bit. Doesn't solve the problem. It never was going to solve the problem. I wonder how much of the presidents did this as yes, this gets you more money, but also doesn't leave these amazing it leaves these institutions out to dry. Like, you wouldn't want to do that. Stanford being left out to dry makes no sense whatsoever, as Jake mentioned. Like, the first to second best at worst athletic institution, college institution in the country. Like, that's a big ad, but yeah, it's weird. And I mean, if we did this conversation in 6 months, I would not expect any of this to be the same because of how litigation is going on either.
Yeah, I think the whole situation with those three teams makes this a lot more interesting. And obviously, a lot of this, I think the way that we've couched this conversation is that a lot of this stuff, even the scheduling agreements and what have you, is pretty dependent on the ACC remaining intact, and also, like,
Right. The
in
grant of
its
rights
current media deal.
The grant of rights is still extremely important to holding this all together and being a strong document that locks the previous 15 into place, and the next three into however this goes until 2036 was the year when it expires, I
Yeah,
think.
2036 is the year. It's interesting. I think another thing that adds a complexity to it too is, like, we're also starting to see the investment of private equity in college football, or not college football, excuse me, in college athletics programs.
A lot of talk about that.
Yeah. And so does that make if I don't know, pick X private equity firm, if they're investing in the Clemson, the UNCs, the FSUs of the world, does remaining in the ACC and remaining in a ostensibly stable conference, well, with the implication that they stay in it,
Right.
are they okay with making up that revenue shortfall somewhere else? I mean, there are a lot of interesting incentives and potentially misaligned incentives with taking that public equity or private equity money. Um, I don't know. You get into a lot of squirrely financial situations very, very easily,
It's
I
not
think.
good. It's nasty. It's not a fun world to be in for college. College athletics should never have to touch that. It's gotten so freaking big that it's just escaped whatever the form was when at least our parents were growing up and things like that. Um, and yeah, the NCAA being so feckless and just unable to
Good words.
do anything about it is kill is causing so much of this as well. But all of us know this. If you follow college sports, you know this. I mean, it gets out into the mainline news as well, just how just broken it's gotten. Um, yeah, the last hour of content here, like I said, like this all definitely applies now. It's legitimate, but there is no way in hell I do not assume any of this is going to be the case in not even 3 years at this point. Like, will the threes, will FSU, Clemson, North Carolina be in some other conference? Very possibly. Wasn't the NCAA or somebody like hired some other consulting firm to like reinvent the conference system, and it just did eight. We talked about this on the
I
podcast, I
don't even
think.
want to talk. I don't
It
want to
was
talk about that proposal because it makes me viscerally
it's
angry
so weird.
for reasons that I can't really talk about.
It was good. I think it was a good situation for Tech. We have lost, but it was a good situation for Tech. But yeah, like there's so many different storylines and proposals and just stuff in the ether that just like none of it's sticking. That to the point, and maybe to circle back to your point about like the private equity, the ACC's grant of rights might be one of the most solid things out there if it holds up in court. Like if the ACC wins these court battles, that makes this 18 team group the most stable group of teams you're going to get in college athletics right now. That
It's
is
also
going
very
But
funny
somewhat broke.
to
so yeah,
yeah,
like broke. They're not broke
broke
broke.
but stable.
Right. Yeah. Like you know what's going to happen. You know they're going to be there, which like, in a way makes it a good investment too, because you know it's going to be there. Uh, so it's so weird. I mean, I know us three talk about it a lot on Slack and stuff when we're talking in person, but I mean, going from a tech perspective. I think we end here. Like going from a tech perspective, how do you guys feel just as fans going into the season, as people that have covered the team, written about the team, gone to the school as well? Like where do we sit from a tech perspective in terms of like where we are now and where this is going to go, at least this year, because we know we're getting 2024 2025 in this format.
It's a very This is a non-answer, but it's a very interesting question. I think
It's a very
let me
interesting.
put it this way. I feel I'm going to use my therapy words. I feel that with the addition of these three teams, Tech is on the whole worse off, right?
Okay.
Not financially. Obviously, they're making more money financially, but from a competitive balance standpoint,
Yeah.
they're losing ground in men's basketball and women's basketball and
Mhm.
women's volleyball,
I
right?
disagree
I
on
mean,
men's
men's basketball,
basketball
you
pretty
can
hardcore.
Men's basketball, we might be
women's
good. We don't know yet.
men's basketball, you can okay, like coin flip, but like women's basketball, you're definitely losing ground in,
I'll
right?
be behind
You're
Stanford. Yep.
losing
Yep.
ground in women's and women's volleyball, which is a program that I think all three of us have been very, very effusive in our praise of over the
Yeah.
last at least five
They
years,
we've noted they are
right?
not the Stanfords and those. Like that is the tier we have mentioned. They are not there yet, but they're right behind.
Right. And so like and as Jake has made very clear, Cal and Stanford and SMU not doesn't apply to this, but Cal and Stanford have very extensive and ACC matching extensive athletics programs,
Yeah.
right? They
Even more
support
so,
basically
even
every
more so than Georgia Tech does.
Right.
Be
Yeah.
yeah,
honest.
I mean they have women's soccer, both of them have women's soccer, right? And we don't, right? So like
Everyone has
and that
women's
is a
soccer and we don't.
required
But
but you get what I'm saying, right? Like that
Yeah.
they out this the competitiveness of their other programs, right? Set aside that, we've discussed to death that the revenue generating programs are bad for two of those three teams, but the depth of their program is so high, and that's why Stanford is doing so well in these Directors Cup things, that I think a team that Georgia Tech has slotted itself so firmly in the middle of the conference, is as a whole worse off. Not necessarily like maybe less at the top, but like
Mhm.
definitely in the depth of
Right. It,
the athletic
in
program
all
is
the
worse off.
in all those sports where we usually get clobbered by a North Carolina school of your choosing, Stanford is the exact same in that regard.
You'll
Like
be
they're
clobbered. Will
I,
be clobbered by a North
but,
Carolina school and or Stanford or Cal.
but this is where you guys get Stanford brained, I think. Like, I think pound for pound, Georgia Tech can compete with Cal in just about every sport in which we field a team other than men's and women's swimming, in which they delete us simply from existence.
yes.
And pound for pound, I think until I see, and especially looking at the non-con versus conference breakdown in SMU's record, um, like they're a good program. They've won in an inferior conference until they get here and prove it. Like maybe football, Georgia Tech kind of slots out pretty close to, but like the rest of these sports, we don't really line up with them in a ton of sports that are not basketball and tennis. They don't have baseball, they don't have softball. Yeah, they got a volleyball team, they got basketball teams, things like that. You know, you, and I think this gets to my point where I see it as a problem for Georgia Tech. It's a really, really microcosm, and stick with me on this, really, really microcosm or really micro level version of the problem, the SEC problem that Georgia Tech has. And the reason it's a version of that is you're replacing games that fans were already lukewarm about with teams they do not care about. And granted, in the modern Georgia Tech, maybe it's playing Stanford or Cal in something turns more heads than playing a Syracuse would or, or
Mhm.
or a Boston College. But we've spent the entire time I've had my experience working from the Rumble seat, the entire time I've been involved with even just Georgia Tech in general, the entire time we've had this podcast, we've talked about how leaving the SEC was a mistake for a lot of reasons, but one of those is severing those longtime rivalries: Auburn, Alabama,
Yeah. Yeah.
Vanderbilt. We played for a trophy with Vanderbilt, Tulane, a historic Georgia Tech rival, Tennessee.
Mhm.
They tore the roof of the wreck in half and painted it orange. Like that was something people cared about, and
Right.
people I would argue still do care about. Like look at the turnout when we did finally play Tennessee. Just listen to how people still talk
Yeah.
about Auburn and Alabama. And the fact of the matter is you're taking Duke, and granted that's a team we played for a long time and that some tepid attendance and at least on the football side
Yeah.
of the house.
Yeah.
But like when you play Duke in basketball and pretty good crowd for the women too, like that building fills up. When you play Clemson in football, it's a game people care about, and that's not on the schedule anymore. I think my biggest concern is not athletic competition, and it's not the money, because we already know that the best way to solve Tech's money problems is to go and whisper in Ed Harrison's ear 50 years ago or 60 years ago not to leave the SEC. My problem is I worry about apathy. It's something that Georgia Tech fights in athletics in particular in so many ways.
Mhm.
And an SMU home game is just like bringing in some random mid-major, except maybe even worse because you don't get, the Georgia State or Georgia Southern bump from people who are interested in the matchup on a cursory level, even if it's not a rivalry. It has local
Right.
interest. There's
Right. Right.
no local interest to SMU, and the
No.
people that would be more intrigued by a Stanford Georgia Tech game than a Clemson versus Georgia Tech game are Akshay. This is not a visual medium, but the people who are more intrigued by that are not the people who are currently going to sporting events. And I worry that it's not enough to get them to go to those sporting events, if that makes sense. And I say that as somebody who was highly involved in getting people to go to sporting events in college.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
I
it's
get your
why I
point.
write for this website.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two things on this. Number one, it's always very funny for me to like have stats or like a competitive balance based argument, and then Jake, of course, comes in with the vibes half of it. It's a very
No, this
good
is not vibes.
mix,
This is
right?
history. This is
Well,
history.
well yes, but like you get what I'm saying. There's like the competitive balance and then the culture, right?
It really
Like
was
the
great.
two
Yes, this
halves
was
of
a
that.
fantastic dichotomy.
We're in
Yes,
our
yes,
It's a
bag.
good
This is the
dichotomy.
definition of our bag. This is
yes.
what our podcast is all
Oh
about.
yeah. I agree. I don't disagree with you. I think you're right in that all of this lacks hate. There is no hate in any of
Yes.
these.
Yes.
There's
That's a
no
great way to put
there's
it.
no
Yes, yes,
reason
yes.
like my sister is a current is attends Georgia Tech right now, right? There's no internal intrinsic desire for her to go to any three of these games because they're just schools that she knows,
Right.
right? They're not
Yeah.
nearby. She doesn't have friends that go to them. Like there's no baseline like intense emotional intensity that's built in
It's a
to
novelty
any of
act.
these matchups.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
are like scheduling Ole Miss for a home and home in football, like you said.
Right. Right.
Like there's no other reason for it other than revenue generation, which obviously is a very important part. You've said all of this already. I'm kind of rehashing it,
Well,
but like there's just no hate. There's no
and dare
hate.
I say,
I can't care about it.
there is some value in Georgia Tech doing one-off or once-a-year trips to the Bay Area, because athletics are the front porch to the university. As much as people hate to admit it, that it is the thing that most
It is. Yep.
successfully activates alumni staying involved with the university, and we can
Mhm.
hash that 6 ways to Sunday. There's lots of people out there that don't want to believe that, but there's the reason why Georgia Tech go up in academic ranking thing does numbers for social media engagement and things like that. But the physical event that keeps people tied to campus or just keeps Georgia Tech on their mind is, oh yeah, it's Saturday. How's Georgia Tech doing? Even if they're not at the game, even if they're
Yeah.
not at the game.
Yeah.
And that's where there's value in saying, hey, Georgia Tech alumni in the Bay Area, because there are a lot of them out there. We're
Oh
playing at
boy, are there
Stanford
a
this
lot of
year.
them out there?
We're playing at Cal this year. We're playing at Washington. We're not actually doing this. This is not news. But like playing a football game or a basketball game at Washington. Why?
Or a baseball game.
And
We
heck,
should
there's
do
a lot
that.
of Georgia
We
Tech
should do that.
alums in Dallas and Austin. There's value in going to do a one-on-one against
Yeah.
Texas in some sport of notability, or against SMU even in some sport.
I'm liking this Washington idea.
Or yeah, or Northwestern in maybe say men's basketball if that comes to pass. And maybe it shouldn't be in Milwaukee, but we can talk about that if it ever does come to pass. That was just a Twitter rumor I saw. At the end of the day, I just want people to care about Georgia Tech sports. And other than it being a lark in year one, I don't know how much this moves the needle. And it makes me sad to lose playing Clemson on the road every 2 years or Virginia Tech. The one
Oh
thing,
my God.
conference
Virginia
realignment
Tech
for
and
Georgia
Duke.
Tech is Virginia Tech playing Notre Dame a little more often. And dare I say, you can even lump in like when we were able to play Miami and Florida State pretty regularly. Those games had some juice. But if you're not playing them every year, like we just have come off 3 straight bangers with UNC in football. 3
Yeah.
notable narrative defining games.
Truly funny
Jeff Collins proof of concept game. Josh Downs drops touchdown, Brent Key miracle worker gets him hired game. And then homecoming Drake May shootout bonanza fiasco. And you're going to go from that to, okay, now we don't play every year. That's how you build things that people care about. And there's finally this momentum for that team in particular. And then Clemson kind of on the come down, or so they say. Hey, maybe that heats up and there's even more fire to it. And we're doing it right as it goes away. And I was honestly excited about the Louisville permanent rival thing that we got. Because I feel like there's a lot of potential there in share, like granted, two very different like cultures and whatnot and academic wise, but like Southern City, like there's enough to work with that it's interesting. Need some rivals in the conference, if you will, reasonably close, but not too close. It's not too hard of a flight or undoable of a drive. It could be closer, but it's not. I've just been rambling for
I get you. Well,
a hot minute now, so draw me back in. But I feel like this is all really valid.
Let me carry on a couple of your points because I think they are worth exploring a little bit here. I'm looking at our 2025 football schedule. If you want to look with me, to your point of like scheduling games where we have alumni, we do play Colorado in 2025 in Boulder. That is a Denver is a great is where we definitely I have plenty of tech recent graduate friends of mine that are now living out there. Which I
That is true, but it
that
is
is
not the first place that I would say that tech graduates live, to be fair.
no, it's not,
But
but
it's one where we don't play very often,
it
and he's
is
totally on par with that. It's
it's
a great
That's
exposure
fine.
game for
it's
them.
right there. It's right there, and if Dion's still there, it's going to be a crazy TV game selling point, anyways, for us.
Oh,
Which
don't.
there is,
Why do you gotta do that? Why do you gotta
No,
make me think
it's
of that?
but
totally valid. It is totally valid,
uh,
and also they haven't played since before the whole 1990 fiasco.
right,
That is
there's a
so
lot
much
of
narrative.
so much,
There's
so much,
oh,
yeah. And to your
I'm with you,
point,
Jack.
my initial question was like about this year. How do you feel? And yes, we don't have we're not doing the Duke and Clemson thing, but we do play them in 2025. We do have those games there. So in terms of that, in terms of next year, I like how that all feels. We also get a shot to beat Temple after that embarrassing loss.
Oh, good grief! I
So
forgot about that.
yeah, there's a lot of home games next year. So 2025, I think, in terms of like how you're talking about this, Jake, I think is a good, assuming 2024 goes well. Which, if you ask me right now, I say on a whole, the arc of the athletic department is going the right direction. I think we're set up for success down the road here. 2025 feels like a great year to make a big old launch up into the stratosphere. But yeah,
And to that point, even with them off this year, you balance it out with big Florida State game, huge narrative energy. Notre
mm-hmm.
Dame, historical rival on the schedule. There's enough balance in these next 2 years, but it's not football I'm concerned with either. There's only 6, 7 home dates. Like the people who are inspired to go are going to go. But a Tuesday
Yeah.
night basketball game against SMU,
No, not at all. Yeah, I'll be very curious how that gets scheduled. I mean, I mentioned that before, but like how basketball gets scheduled can be very interesting. I guess I'll put my 2 cents here.
Yeah.
To get us closed out. I my dirty brain loves playing teams we've never played before all the time if you can. Like the some sort of pods seating version where like it's not geographic based, tickles my brain in a certain way.
Pots.
But like that's not feasible. It's not realistic. Like I mean, having been friends with athletes and knowing some in the past and like just watching our athletes all the time, like I hate the idea of us having to do this crazy travel thing. I hate the idea of them in California and Texas having to do this crazy travel thing, and in Arizona and all over the country now. Like this is going to this is going to make the sports worse probably to some extent. And you don't want the sports to be worse as a television product. But it very well might be.
It's very circular when you
Well,
think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's like the whole thing was made to be like juice television revenues, but you've made what's generating those television revenues ostensibly worse.
Yeah, the blow.
It's
like,
fascinating. It's
like,
a fascinating cultural artifact.
we are going. I know the three of us are going to be inherently interested in watching the 11:30 p.m. USC Rutgers game as sickos, but there is just no way in hell that game is going to be a good football game.
I respect myself more than that. Don't put that evil on me. I have some baseline level of self-respect. I will not be party to that.
And Jack, I think that's where we can kind of tie a bow on all this there is interest. There is some sporting value. There is some novelty value. But at the end of the day, it's like this is what is it? A land of contrast. What's the meme, Akshay?
In short, this subject is a land of contrast.
The subject is a land of contrast. Like travel has been bad a long time. Shoot, how many times has Georgia Tech played in Atlanta this year? Or Louisville softball played in Atlanta this year. Once. My sister's been through that airport like 5 times on travel. Like that's
crazy. It's crazy stuff.
Just, and the one-off and times changing and all that. Like Mizzou still feels like a weird fit in the SEC, right? Like this is it's the same as it ever was, but it seems like it's the most ever was. Oh gosh, that's a terrible metaphor.
No, I get your point.
Oh, you're doing
this
you're doing
the
the bits. You're doing this with some duo bits, Jake. Same as it ever was.
That's your job.
We are at the most extreme version of this craziness. For tech specifically, I think I'm more concerned about just where we are, how we're taking care of our business before we get into the, okay, how does this new reality face us? This new reality is fantastic, like fascinating. There's a reason we've been talking for being close to 2 hours when it comes to off recording time about this. I think we are set up, regardless of who we play, to be in a better spot as an athletic institution by the end of this athletic season. I think in a lot of ways we're going to be we're going to be a better product to watch. We're going to be more appealing. We're going to have better storylines this year to follow. I think just between Brent and Damon, you've got plenty just to deal with right
Oh yeah.
there. And volleyball being as fantastic as they've always been, they're going to play Florida this year. We're going to get a rematch of that game, and we're going to play Stanford twice. And the ACC is always hard. We're going to play Georgia, and like it's going to be great. So I think as a whole, if you're sitting at home, like how do you feel about this? Feel about it however you want. Like this is you got in three distinct perspectives here, but just know that like Tech is set up and they have done the work to make themselves more relevant than they have been in a long time. And regardless of who we play, I think we're going to be great. And the fact this gets us a little bit more money, also great.
I have a bold prediction that didn't fit anywhere in this.
Oh, okay.
Cleanly.
Okay.
I think the ACC will be the second best conference in softball
Ooh.
by an identifiable margin next
Okay.
year.
So it's the SEC and then the ACC and then the Big 12.
Yep, and the Big 12.
Okay. Okay.
I want to put that out there now. Big 10 might be in the mix there.
Maybe.
We've
I mean,
seen
it
some
makes sense.
turnover out there, but I just
Yeah, the
I
SEC
had
getting
this
it.
cooking in the back of my head on competitive balance, and we were talking about things we're excited for. Baseball and softball are so far away, I can't even think about it.
Oh, yeah.
The
the SEC getting Oklahoma and Texas makes that very easy for the SEC to be far. They were already far and away the best, but that just puts them at another level. Same for baseball, but
yeah.
I think we did it, guys.
I think we've done it.
I've got a really short trivia I was inspired to pull up with a conversation we had very late in the podcast. Can I go?
Oh, sure. It's summer. We have no
Go
rules.
for it.
All right, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia Tech has played Colorado how many times in all sports combined?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then name those sports. Two. You said
it's
two.
Two?
Two times. No, it's not two. Or not two. But I want your number of times played total and number of teams that have played them.
I will say 4 total games, and I will throw in baseball, football, and men's basketball.
They don't have a baseball team, so
Nah.
I tried.
Checks out.
All right, Jack.
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna go a little bit higher. Oh, okay. Well, that having baseball does kind of shrink the window of opportunity here. Yeah, let's go with like 3 and a home and home with men's basketball and a football game in there.
We have never played Colorado in football.
Okay.
Ever. Period.
Okay. Yep.
Never played them in men's basketball.
Okay.
Georgia Tech has played 5 total contests against Colorado. The first being in women's basketball. It was in 1984. Men's and women's tennis hosted Colorado on the same day, March 24th, 1989, in a doubleheader.
Okay.
Home, that is the last time we have played them at home in any sport. I believe both of those were wins as well as the women's basketball game. Georgia Tech has played Colorado twice since 1989, both in volleyball. One was clearly in the tournament because it was a December date in 2000, and the other was 1995 on the road. It is the only contest Georgia Tech has played at Colorado. The only loss to Colorado is that volleyball tournament loss December 1st of 2000. That was 3-1 all-time. Georgia Tech is 4-1 against Colorado and would have been 5-1 if they had played in 1990, as I'm sure we can all agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, buddy.
So fun.
There we go.
So fun.
There we
Dion,
go.
we're coming for you. I mean, if he still has I mean, if Shadur gets drafted, does he stick around? Who knows?
For somebody
Deion
else
Sanders, future head coach of the
ours.
Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
Dallas Cowboys, here he comes. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you to Section 103 for being a big sponsor of the show. You can find them again at section103.com. Jake, lead us out today. 4 for 4.
You can find them at Section 103 on Twitter as well. You can find From the Rumble Seat on Twitter at FTR's blog. I'm at Jake Grant98. Jack is at Jack Nicholas. However, the best way to get in touch with us is via email from the Rumble Seat at gmail.com. You can find us and this podcast and all the stuff we write at From the Rumble Seat rumble.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at From the Rumble Seat. Please rate, review, subscribe, comment, tell your friends. The word of mouth spread podcast is the very best way to tell folks that you're passionate about what we do here as much as we are. And in the meantime, see you next week. Good night, good luck, and go Jackets.